You want to carefully guide everything into the cylinder. And then right there. And from here you just boom. Hey, what's up everybody? So this is a direct continuation off of the last engine build when we installed the crankshaft in the block. That's all done, it's all lubed up, I'm ready to go. So now we're going to go on to the pistons and rods. So we're going to go over everything involved in installing these into the block. I already ahead of time prepared these to go into the block. So these have the rod bearings and the rings installed. We're going to be going into the clocking of the rings as well. So basically, when you put the piston rod assembly into the block, you have to clock the rings a certain orientation. That way, when the pistons are in operating motion, the rings are, you don't want a ring gap to be on top of another one because that'll cause blow by and just things like that. So yeah, we're gonna go into installing the bearings, rings, and then eventually using this tool, which is a ring compressor tool designed specifically for the bore of this engine. And we're going to be using that to install the pistons, and basically what that does is it compresses the rings and allows you to successfully install the piston and rod assembly into the block. So yeah, I'll start with, I guess, installing the rod bearings and then going into detail about how to install the rings onto the pistons. So, yeah. So when you are about to install the rod bearings into the rod itself, I find it difficult to separate the actual big end two halves. So obviously it has two halves here, and I don't want to forget to mention that I did mark one side, and I did that for each of the rods. I marked the side so that I know which side goes on which when I put it back, just because, I just want to make sure it goes back to its home, its original home where it came from. So I find that it's a little difficult, at least I haven't separated this ever, so it's a little difficult to actually separate the two halves. So you kind of have to work with it, and then it just comes apart like that. So the main goal in the beginning is to get everything as clean as possible. That way when you install the bearing, there's no debris or any sort of oil or any lubricant from the assembly or from the manufacturing process in the bore of the actual big end. So you're just going to take brake clean and a clean rag and go ahead and clean it. And that's going to be the first step to installing the rod or the bearings. So I went ahead and I also cleaned the bearings themselves, the top and the bottoms of them, so that there's no chance of any debris or any assembly lubrication with the bearings surface. So as you can see, with the rod bearings in particular, they have these little tangs here. As for the main bearings, they don't have these. So these little tangs line up with the indent in the actual big end of the rod here. And don't mind these, they're the little scuffs or anything like that. That's not gonna take effect into anything. But the tang lines up with those little indents, so you can't really put them backwards because they won't go in. So what you do is, same thing with the main bearings, you kind of just get it in place and then press, and then it should slide right into place, no problems. You want to go in dry. Like I said, everything has to be clean. You want to go in perfectly dry. And then, just for good measure, clean your hands off just to get rid of any oils or anything like that. Make sure everything's dry. And then move on to the actual connecting rod portion. Put the tang in place. And just press. And then that is your bearing installation for your rods. And we're going to be going in dry first because, just like the crankshaft, we're going to be measuring the bearing clearances. Everything should check out okay, but I just want to do it for educational purposes so people can see, and so that I don't just slap everything together without knowing that the clearances were actually in spec. So now that the bearings are in place, it's good to note that before you assemble the rod inside its home in the block, you're going to want to clean these. These are the rod bolts that slide into these holes and connect the two pieces of the big end together. You're going to want to clean those off and get all of that assembly lubrication off of them, and just make sure everything's clean, because these are ARP bolts, so you will be able to use the ARP lubrication on the threads of them when you are installing them. So, and that's something that you do want to do. I know Manly has their own separate formula for this, but the ARP lubricant I've seen works just fine. So I'm just going to clean these up, and then once I have these clean, I'm going to move on to installing the rings onto the piston. So when it comes to the rings, I was told by a colleague of mine, Benjamin. He built his 2.3 liter stroker, and he recommended that I use ATF fluid to coat the piston rings for break-in purposes, because naturally the ATF has cleaning products in it, cleaning agents, so it'll keep everything clean when the engine starts up and while I'm installing it. So I was told to use the ATF on the cylinder walls and the rings themselves. I am going to, because I did put ATF in the cylinders. It's coated all the cylinders, all 4 of them, and I will be using engine oil as well, just to add that extra lubrication. Can't really have too much. So yeah, ATF, soak all the rings, literally everything, even the expansion ring for the oil rings assembly here. So you just want to coat everything before you install it. So the easiest ring to start with is obviously going to be the expansion ring for the oil ring itself, just because it's very flexible, it's very maneuverable, you can do a lot with it. So how I like to do it, well, it doesn't really matter with this one because it's super easy to put on, but obviously it's the oil ring, so it's going to go on the very bottom right there. So this is your expansion ring, and then the oil ring rails, and that's what these are right here, the little thin guys. They do not have a top or a bottom, so don't really need to stress too much about those when it comes to top and bottom. When I gapped the rings, I went over what top and bottom was for the 2 compression rings, and yeah, if you want to reference those, you can definitely go back and watch that video and when I gapped them. But when you're doing it, you're going to want to make sure that the 2 ends of the expansion ring aren't like that. You want to make sure that they're butted up together, which I had right there. They're butted up together perfectly. So that's what you're looking for. Now with these, there's multiple ways you can install it. It is a lot more bendable than the other compression rings. As you can see, that's has a lot more leeway, but you don't want to bend it too much because it does have a limit. So I like to start with one end and then kind of work around the piston and then bring it. It's a little difficult to, especially with the oily hands, it's a little difficult to get a hand on it, but I'm sure you get the concept. These rail rings go on the top and the bottom of the expansion ring, and I'm trying to get the rail on the bottom of it, like this one over here. So I'll work on that. Hopefully I get it right now. Yeah, there it is, right there. Perfect. So that one is in place. Now we're gonna work on this guy right here. So I'm gonna coat this one in ATF, just like I did the other rail. Just coat it in ATF. And then repeat the same process. Hopefully this one goes in smoother. Just like that. And there you have it. There's your oil ring assembly. Not very much to it. Now when it comes to the 2 compression rings, like I said, I did go over which one was the second compression ring and the first compression ring in the other video, so This is going to be our second ring, the second compression ring, and that is going to be going in this channel right here, right above the oil ring assembly. And these ones are a lot more stiff. As you can see, it's got a lot of resistance to it, not a lot of give to it. So you have to be really careful when you're installing these ones, because you don't want to over bend them and then cause it to have a permanent bend. You kind of, it's ideally you want to have the ring installer tool, which spreads these the two ends, and you can slide it over the ring or over the piston without any problems. But don't have it, so we're using our hands, and I did it the exact same technique with all the rest of them. So when you're looking at this ring, I don't know if you can see it, but it says top right here where my index finger is. It says the M for the Molly, obviously, and then it says top. That is not referencing the top ring. That is just referencing that this is the top of the ring. So, and then this ring right here would be the first compression ring, and this is your top ring. So this is ring number 2. I'm gonna do my best to do this smoothly. It's not always easy, but it's definitely doable. Makes it a little bit more difficult with the gloves. But boom, there it is. And that is second compression ring installed. And then this is the first one right here. And then this also has a indicator for top and bottom. And what you're looking for is, it's kind of hard to see on this one, but it's a little M right here. I don't know if the camera can pick it up. It's a little M right here. That's indicating the top of the ring. Like I said, the rails for the oil ring do not have a top or bottom, but these ones do, and it's very crucial that you put them in the right orientation. So same as the other ring. Can get a little finagly, but eventually you'll get it. And right there, that's all your rings installed, ready to go, all coated in ATF. So I went ahead and off camera I installed the assembly lube that we used for the crank. Those bearings. I put it on the actual rod bearings for just the rod portion of the assembly, and I left the actual caps dry, because this is what we're going to be referencing for the bearing clearances. So these can actually have lube on them, because I don't want to have to take them out again. I have to reinstall them to, you know, after we get the bearing clearance measurements. I don't want to have to take them out again. So right now I'm in the process of orienting the rings in the proper order according to Molly specifications. So if you open it up, it goes and shows you what you're dealing with here. So front of the engine, that means, you know, the actual front side where the cam gears are going to be. So in our case, if you come to the engine, this is going to be the front of the engine. So this is the front of the car, and our timing, everything timing oriented over here is going to be the front of the engine. So if you think of it, this is how the piston is going to be set and the rings are going to be set. So it says engine front, and that's right there, and then this center line right here is the wrist pin center line. So that's where the wrist pin sits in the piston, and our top compression ring gap is going to sit over here. Our second compression ring gap is going to sit 180 degrees out from the top compression ring, which is pretty standard. And then the oil ring expander, that ring is it has this range right here, and it has to lie between that range and the top oil rail gap. It sits over here, and then the bottom oil rail gap sits on this side over here. So I already went ahead and did that for 1 through 3. And you can see it right here. This is the top compression ring, so all of them are in the same spot for 1, 2, and 3, and so forth with all the rest of the rings. They're oriented correctly. So for this one, I have not touched yet, and if you look, all of them are in the same spot. Even the rails are in the same spot, and the expansion ring. So I have a lot of work to do when it comes to adjusting the position of them. So in our case, this is going to be the front of the engine going this way, So, and then here's the wrist pin, so that's going to be our center line. And then going off the paperwork, so it would be like this. What I have been doing with the rest of them is actually doing the oil ring first. So, I mean, it helps to have like a dental tool or something. You just got to be very gentle, and you know, you can move the top rail independently from the bottom rail, or you can just use your fingers to kind of move it around. But it's just I'm not gonna sit here and have us film everything and every step of doing that. You kind of just have to know what you're doing, and it tells you clearly on the paperwork. Usually when you get pistons, it'll indicate where the rings need to be. So that's what we're going off of when it comes to the ring orientation. Some engine builders prefer it differently because they have different techniques or different reasons behind why they do it, but I'm going off of this just because that's what the manufacturer says is the best possible option. So I'm going to line all these up just like the 1 through 3, and then we can actually finally install the pistons in the block. So pretty excited. So now that I have all of the rings in the proper position, I went ahead and I oiled up the ring compressor just with 530 oil, just to make sure everything slides in nice and smooth. So I already went ahead and I placed piston number 1 into cylinder number 1. So you can see it right here. It's in its home and it is on the crank. And I'd like to note that right now 1 and 4 are at bottom dead center, and that is the ideal position that it needs to be in when you're installing the pistons. So there is a direction for the pistons themselves, and the easiest way to tell is this little bucket here for our engines in particular, the STs. The front of the engine is where the injectors are going to be spraying, so they're going to be spraying into this little pocket here. So that's an easy way of knowing which way is front and which way is back. So I'm going to go ahead and place this guy in here. I'm just going to double check my rings, make sure everything's lined up here before I set it in place. Right there. And what this tool does is it easily just compresses all of the rings to where they need to be. So you want to carefully guide everything into the cylinder, and then right there, and from here you just boom. So now piston's in. Now we just need to push it down into its final resting place. So now that we have 1 and 4 in place, we can actually rotate it over. There, and so right here you can see both of the pistons are right, or both of the rods are right here, and this section of the crankshaft is dry, and this is where we're going to be setting our plastic gauge. So just like the main bearings, I mean, I'm not going to go in detail and show you guys how to install it or anything like that. You can just go back to that video to see how to cut it and install it on here, but we're going to put the plastic gauge in place, clamp everything down, and then take it off, and then see what our measurements are. So I'm just going to be putting the caps on. So this is for piston number 1, which is this guy right here. And just keep in mind, you're still looking for that Sharpie mark, just so you're putting it on the right way. Plastic gauge is there, plastic gauge is there. So I'm just going to set this on. That's there. So now what we're going to do is apply the ARP lube to the bolts, run the bolts in, and then from there we're going to be clamping them down. So when you're clamping these down, the big ends of the rods, the range is between 50 to 60 foot-pounds. We're gonna go with 60 foot-pounds for these ones, and you just like the main studs, you're gonna go in stages. So with these ones, we're gonna do 30-60, unlike the other ones where we did increments of 20. These ones, you don't have to really be too crazy about them, but we are gonna be doing stages, which is going to be initial 30 foot-pounds. Just gotta get there, and then from there we'll step up to the 60 foot-pounds. So naturally it's gonna want to rotate on you, and you do not want that at all, just because this end of the rod is actually dry. So you just like when you didn't want the crank to rotate when we were clamping the main studs down when we were doing those clearances, we don't want this to rotate at all. So do everything you can to prevent the crank from actually turning over. That way you don't damage the crank journal and the bearing surface as well, because there's no oil, it's just completely dry. So see if I can maintain this. Alright, so now that we have both of the caps off and we have access to both of the plastic gauge strips, here's our measurement, I guess, paper that we're going to be referencing. So just as the main bearings we're sitting at pretty much exactly the same. So it's a little bit thinner than the 15 thousandths here, but still thicker than the 2 thousandths. So we're in that medium of in between the 15 thousandths to 2 thousandth range, which is still satisfactory. So from here we can proceed with the installation of these rods and then move on to the middle two, so it's 2 and 3. So yeah, I'm gonna clean these off, put some assembly lube on the caps, and then we can put those two in for good. Well, everybody, this is, I mean, it's not the end of the journey, but it's a huge milestone when it comes to building the Focus ST engine. So, I mean, I've said multiple times over and over again, I've never done this before. I'm not a professional. I'm just an enthusiast that's trying to learn. So, if there's anybody out there who has comments about what we've done, or up to this point, or you have something to say, or some critique about what we did, please share, because I'm open to new ideas and to new solutions to problems that we run into. We didn't run into any crazy problems doing this. I mean, not really any problems at all. But I mean, besides the cracked head, which I'm gonna have to get a new head now, which is why we're not proceeding with the build, is because I need to buy a new head. So I'm deciding whether or not I want to go with the 4-port exhaust head, which is the Ford Performance route, and I'd have to get a custom exhaust manifold made, and it would just be a large money pit, even more than it already has become. Or I can just get a factory head, the Mana head, which incorporates the header into the head, which is just factory, and then the turbo bolts straight on. That way I can get this into the car as soon as possible. But I mean, I'd like to be able to do the header, but I think just with the situation, I'm gonna have to go with the factory style head. But I'm happy to be at this point. I don't know if I already showed you guys, but the engine does rotate. I mean, it cranks over. I'll probably have to get a ratchet to get it going. As you can see, the engine does turn over, does its thing. It's nice and smooth. Everything's good to go. So it's going to be its resting place until we find a head. I mean, it's fully assembled. The bottom end, at least, not fully assembled, but you know, for the majority of the bottom end, it's pretty much put together. And I'm super excited that we've reached this point. And it's a huge milestone for me and for the build. So thank you so much for, you know, continuing to keep up with the build. There's a long way to go from here. This is just the starting, even though we have, you know, kind of gone a long way. But thank you for watching. If you want to, feel free to subscribe and follow us on Instagram too. And then if you want to see the videos that we put out, we try to post every week. So if you want to see all those and get notified, just hit the bell. And you know, thanks for watching and keeping up with us. And we just thank you so much for the support that all you guys give us. And it's the reason why we do this. Is just we love what we do, and you know, we love hearing your guys' comments and what you guys have to say about it. So yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.